We are a group called the Ipswich and Suffolk Tech Network, and we support, oh, here we go, someone else just come in. We support a number of events in the East region, all online at the moment, and with no plans to go in person yet, but we're working on it. The events that we run sit generally from digital marketing across the suite out to IoT, and we've got a specialist group focusing on cybersecurity. The reason that we've created this umbrella group is to foster relationships with other within the sector specific areas. So for example, there is a new group called the Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre, which has been spun up by the police. So they'll come to us to work with the OWASP and the cybersecurity guys, so that there's a direct connection. So it's not just technology happening in silo, but it's technology that's getting filtered through to the local community, because that kind of digital transformation is not always going to just be about the technology, but about the cultural changes around it. So that's we're trying to humanize this and bring everything together. So that's who we are. I've popped a link in the chat for you, so anyone who's interested. And then we've got events booked for the next couple of months, and we will continue to add events. So if you want to sign up for anything in the future. Although we are an umbrella organisation, the groups that sit underneath us are very much individual, and the aim of it, we've got some more groups coming on board, such as Women at Industrial Park. So there's, a technology group for women. We've also got, as I said, there's an AWS user group, there's an Agile user group. They're all going to about to start up, so we can have all of these different talks happening in one place. But the groups are completely independent. They're not forced to stay with us. So you join them independently. It's just a nice set of curated information. So sign up for updates. And if any of you are interested in giving a talk, if there's anything particular that you think everybody needs to hear about, it's not a sales pitch. We generally look at education. This is very much about empowerment and extra information and community. That's where we sit. So this evening we have Matt Miller, who I can't remember who you worked for. When we first organised this, you worked for a local company. So I can't remember if you're a new company, but we'll let you do the introduction and tell everyone about it. Matt's here from his own time, and we're really grateful for him coming. So I'm going to pass over to Matt now, and he will present and give his introduction. So thank you very much, Matt.
Great, thanks a lot. Hopefully, if we just click present, it should all just go smoothly on the text side. Let me know if it doesn't. I'm going to move. That should be there. All right, you're all over here. I've got a few things on a second screen, so you will see me looking over there from time to time. And I think then we are ready to go. So thank you, Sam, for introducing me. My name is Matt Miller. You just call me Matt, that's fine. Today I've got a talk that I've been kind of thinking about all year, and it is a kind of summary of some of the things that I've been learning, and it's titled Refactoring Towards More Maintainable JavaScript. And I think for me, one of the most important words in there is towards. So I've never given a talk before, so please bear with me, but I'm also going to do something I've never done before, and I found this website that lets you do kind of interactive questions. And I thought I'd start with a little bit of audience engagement. So if everyone could just, you don't have to, but if you like, if you could go to slido.com, and there should be a little bar up the top to enter a code. And if you enter the code on screen, 889514, and it's just some introductory questions so that I can kind of gauge the group and how scared I should be. Also, it would be nice if I didn't have this Zoom bit here. Let's go back. Aha, too many. Okay, great. 40, that is terrifying. So yeah, I just wanted to gauge kind of how long a lot of you have been developing roughly, and then there is a follow-up question. It looks like everyone that's actually entered has been doing this for longer than I have, so that's great news. Hopefully, I can also learn things from the rest of you. Yeah, we're seeing that all roll in, and then I think if I just press this button, you should see another one. That's the plan, at least. As I said, I've never used this before. And like the question says, like, what is your experience of refactoring and kind of software design theory? This is sort of like your classical sort of stuff that you find in books, that people like Martin Fowler and Robert Martin and those sort of names are spouting. So expert Reddit doing it. I love to see that. That's good news. Beginner. I mean, I'm kind of maybe advanced beginner is where I would put myself, which is why I'm doing this talk, to kind of share where I am and what I've been learning. So a lot of people, I think, are where I was at the beginning of the year, and to be honest, still am, and that's okay. So if we just, how do we get back to, okay. So first, what this talk isn't, I think, is important. This is not your sort of definitive guide on writing top-notch JavaScript. I am not out here telling you that this is the way to do things, this is how it should be done. It is very much not dogmatic, and this is not specifically talk about solid principles. Definitely what I'll be talking about can touch upon it, but it is not a talk specifically about solid. There's hundreds of talks out there for that, and I encourage you to go look at them, because I do think it's valuable, but this is not a talk specifically about solid, even though what we'll be doing kind of does overlap. But what this talk is, as I've said, I have been kind of going on a journey this year to try and improve my own skills, and I want to pass on some of that information. So I hope that for those of you who are very experienced, this might provide a different way of looking at the things that you already know and maybe take for granted. Those of you who are less experienced, I hope this talk can be, as it says, a prompt that there is information out there, and that these topics are something that has been studied and spoken about for 40 years or more. The information is out there. You just have to know what you're looking for. And also, I think I encourage you to look outside of your current developer community. So I am primarily a JavaScript developer, but I have kind of traveled through some other communities on the way to get here. And I've taken some things from those, and I think that has changed me for the better as a developer. So I feel like every talk has to have this sort of thing in it. So how did I get here? This is me, 2017, graduating my degree in computing and game development. So it was a sprinkling of game development, but mostly it was kind of business-oriented programming, a lot of object orientation and database design and stuff like that. Quite theoretical, but a lot of applied kind of work. I left there, I think, with some good C# skills and some good sort of theoretical stuff. I then went to an agency called The Frameworks, where I became an iOS developer. Despite knowing nothing about iOS development, I became an iOS developer there using Swift. And then later on, I became a web developer, despite knowing nothing about web development before that. I learned it all on the job. And then later I went to SimpleClick, which is a local company to Ipswich. They're a technical agency. I think some of you here in the audience are from SimpleClick. I saw some names that I recognize. Really glad that you would give me your time this evening. I really appreciate that. And there I was doing web development again, like full stack JavaScript into a longer term code base. And then now I've just moved on to a company called Pebble, and we make broadcast automation for kind of getting the TV that you watch from their kind of back rooms with all the screens and the dials and everything, getting it from there to you. And I'm primarily working on another long-term code base. And so I feel like over time, I've gradually ended up in, I guess you would say, older or more mature code bases over time, which has given me a great opportunity to learn, and it comes with its own difficulties. So why should you listen to me? You don't have to. I'm not an expert. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing all the time. As I said, this is a lot of stuff that I have learned this year. and that I've been trying to improve my own skills. So don't take my word as gospel on this. I think use it as an inspiration as a springboard to kind of do your own research and maybe give you some of your own ideas and tell you what you can go out there and learn. But I am by no means an expert here. I am just a guy who happens to be able to sling some divs, and I'm doing okay, I think. So let's actually get onto kind of the meat of the talk. What even is refactoring? Like, it's this old term. It's been bouncing around the industry for decades now. And one of the biggest names that you'll find in that space is Martin Fowler. He wrote kind of the canonical book on the subject. And specifically, refactoring, from one of his definitions, is a change made to the internal structure of software to make it easier to understand and cheaper to modify without changing its observable behavior. That is the last time that I will read off of a slide. I really hate talks that just read slides at you, but I feel like the definition is very important there. And it is an intentional process. It's not just changing code because you want it to be different, or it's actually changing it internally, but the code and services that are relying on you shouldn't notice that you've changed. Your observable behavior to them should ideally stay the same. If you're changing your observable behavior, you're no longer refactoring, you're rewriting. And that brings its own dangers. And as I said, refactoring is both a noun describing what a refactoring is and a verb because you perform refactoring on a code base. So I've got a kind of a list of key quotes that I've both come across during my research and that I kind of want you to bear in mind. Is the code open? You should make change easy and then make the easy change. Because if your code is open, you should be able to just add lines to add new functionality, ideally, without changing what is already there. Now, you do normally have to make changes, which is why you make change easy and then you make the easy change. And now the word easy is in there twice, and it is not easy. This first part, make change easy, that is often difficult. And this talk is a step on the journey to kind of learning those skills. Also, one of the most important ones is duplication is cheaper than the wrong abstraction, which is something that Sandy Metz, a famous Ruby developer and speaker, says a lot. And it's something that I've come to agree with over time, because here we go. We're going to do some live coding. There's some code smells abound. This should hopefully go well. But peek behind the curtain, how this is going to work. I've got a small application that I wrote for this talk. There's very little code to it. There is if I can pull this over here for your, I won't bring it onto the screen. That's because Mac stuff. There is a series of commits at each stage, introducing new tests for each new requirement, and then implementing the code to fulfill those requirements. So full disclosure, from time to time, if I get lost or anything goes wrong, we may skip ahead to the next sort of logical point. It's kind of there as a backup. And so that because there is tests backing this code, when we reach a new feature, I will just cherry pick the tests, because you don't want to watch me write the tests. I mean, it's not as useful for this talk.
Matt, are you a questions during or questions at the end kind of a man?
I think I'm a questions during, because I think this talk, this is an elaborate pair programming session. We're collaborating on this small application. I think I am not standing in my ivory tower telling you what to do. We're kind of going on the journey together. So by all means, before we start the live code portion, do you have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
Does someone else want to go first if other people have got questions?
Nothing in there.
Okay, so my first question is, if you want to make more maintainable JavaScript, why aren't you using TypeScript?
That is a very good question. I use it at my new job, and I honestly believe that you should be moving to TypeScript if you want to be developing anything beyond a medium application. I haven't used TypeScript for this talk to make it more accessible to anyone watching it.
Cool, good answer.
That said, if it was just for me, I would be using TypeScript. All of my new code that I use personally at this point is in TypeScript, and I am trying to write everything that I do personally with tests as well at this point, because I see that as being like the next stage for me. But yeah, like I say, I want this talk to be accessible, so JavaScript it is. Any other questions? No? Okay. So just to kind of fill you in. Oh, not that button. No, I do not want that. I just want... Oh, God. It's already gone wrong. New terminal. What is all this? There we go. Sure. Sure. There we go. Sorry about that. So, as I said, there's some tests for this. For the most part, you don't actually care what's going on the left-hand side here. It should be green. Every now and then, it will turn red. The actual text of what you can see here is less important than the concept itself. So, to give you a little brief walkthrough, at the moment, there's only 3 files. We have a small application that kind of recreates a part of a school where you have students who can enroll on courses. They get graded on those courses, and then at the end of the year, you can output a transcript of what they did, and it will tell you they did this course and they achieved this grade. That is the program. So we've got a student file. This just kind of, I'm making an ID for the user. I have names, and then you can add grades to them, which get stored in this courses object. There are courses themselves, which enforce a few requirements to make sure that students are allowed to enroll on that course. And they have the transcript file, which for the most part loops over the students' courses, and it's just going to output some strings for what they got. Like I said, it's very simple. At the moment, all the tests pass. Now, at the moment, there are also some issues with the code. Those of you who are very experienced have probably already seen loads and you're screaming inside. I get that, and that's fine. That's what we're here for. I would argue that until we need to make changes, this code is fine. It's theoretically running in production. Our users are happy with it. They've not reported any bugs. Why would we make changes to it at this point? I would argue that we should only really be making changes to it in refactoring when we have to make changes for new functionality or to fix bugs. That is the time when you would be looking to refactor so that you can enable those new changes. Speaking of which, we've got a new requirement. So we've found that students, they've been taking courses, they get graded on them, and a lot of the students that are about to graduate and go to university, they don't have the grades that they need to get into their university of choice. So they're sneaking in at night, they're doctoring the data for their transcript so that it will output something that says, yes, they can go to their university of choice. So we've been asked to add the same validation that is in place for enrolling on a course. We've been asked to add the same validation to the place that generates their transcript. Simple as that. So the go away zoom. I don't know if you can all see the zoom stuff at the top of the screen, but it is definitely in my way. So at the moment, we've got some simple validation logic that checks, does this course have a prerequisite course? And does it have a prerequisite grade? And we've got some simple code that just checks those. I'm going to fast forward to the point where the tests are implemented. So as you can see, we've got some new tests that are now failing, and we are just going to write some simple code that will pass those tests. So we've already got this logic in the course. We need some similar logic in the transcript file, and it's going to go here. As you can see, we've got a comment describing the issue, and like I mentioned earlier, do we need to be refactoring all the time for simple changes? Maybe not. The simplest way to perform this behavior is to just copy and paste. I know this is a refactoring talk, and I'm telling you just copy and paste this. He's mad. I promise it's okay. Obviously, the code as copied doesn't work straight away. And in fact, just to facilitate the talk, here is the actual correct version that should pass the tests. The logic is the same, just there's some slight name differences. Should we refactor now? I'd argue that maybe not. You know, it's only used in 2 places. We don't know that they have the same reason to change. I know this isn't a talk about solid, but there is, I think, two of the important ones that are going to come up in this talk is the S for the single responsibility principle. We don't know that they're going to change at the same rate and for the same reasons. So I'd argue at the moment it's only in 2 places. It's not causing us any pain. I think we should leave it. We've now passed all of our tests. We're fulfilling the requirements. So in this refactoring talk, I'm saying don't refactor yet. It's okay. But then a new requirement comes in, and then this is where the issues start to occur, because code changes over time. Code changes because requirements change. Now, previously, one thing I forgot to tell you is that a student's grade is just a string. It's just A, B, C, etc. There's a list of them here. This value isn't used, it's just to kind of demonstrate it to you. But now our customer wants grades to be backed by a numerical value as well. As it says, they don't know exactly what they want to do with that numerical score data yet, but they do know they want it to be there, which if anyone has worked in an agency environment, that's a pretty standard request from a customer. They want something, but they don't necessarily know why they want it yet. And then also courses have a new requirement that the student should be of a specific year group, because, for example, we don't want year 7 students taking GCSE biology because they should be in year 10 or year 11 for that. So again, I'm just going to fast forward to the place with the new tests. Okay, so of these 2 requirements, I'm going to start with the grades. I've got some new tests for grades. As you can see, they're failing at the moment. We've just been using grades like this as strings. We can just, because strings are under the hood just like an ASCII value, most languages will just let you compare strings using a less than or a greater than. And we can say that is A greater than B. You have the requirements to get onto this course. Now we need to introduce something a bit more complicated. So we're just going to make a grades file. We're going to export a default class grade. It's going to have a constructor of a score. And then we have the logic inside of there. Now, also for the grades, they have a an actual, like the values of what corresponds to an A or a B, etc. I'm just going to copy that in for you because it's not interesting. So, you know, if you're a 90 or above, you've got an A. 80 or above, you've got a B. Scores, especially in JavaScript, you know, quite often we don't know what our users are going to be inputting. So I would argue that score could be a number, could be a string. They could be inputting A, they could be inputting 92. So we're going to have to support both of those. Oh, what's that noise? String. If it's just a string, we can basically recreate the existing behavior. Right? This is almost exactly the same as our previous behavior before this new requirement. If it is a number, then we're going to have to assign the right values. Now, it would be nice if JavaScript allowed you to like use a switch for this, and you could say like if the score is between A or B. I don't know if you can recreate that using JavaScript functionality. I wish you could. I have yet to find a way. By all means, tell me afterwards if you have. So instead, we just need to write a lot of if statements. I'm going to write one of them. I think Zoom is interacting with my keystrokes here and there, which is unfortunate.
You can set switch to true.
Pardon?
If you set the switch to true, then you can put any condition you want.
I don't know at the moment if that would work. All I've got in my head is my talk, unfortunately. But we can come back to that idea. Definitely, we can come back to that idea. I'm not going to implement all of these in front of you, but you get the gist of it. We're just going to set some strings again. So I'm going to copy and paste this long set of if statements because that's boring to watch. You don't care about that. Okay, so if it's a string, we'll assign a letter to our provided score. If it's a number, we're going to assign based on the value. And also, because it's JavaScript, we never entirely know what's coming in. If it's neither a string or a number, I'm just going to output something to the console with an error. Okay, the tests are still failing because we need to actually go use this in different places. Come on. Yeah, okay. So now that we've implemented this class that represents the concept of a grade, and we know that it's going to have a letter on there, I'm going to just update the tests again for a moment so that we can fast forward a little bit. Okay, so I've just updated the tests to work with this new functionality. Arguably, this wasn't necessarily a refactor because I've got a deleted file because we've had to update places that are using it. There is definitely some gray area between refactor and kind of implementing new features. Right, places that are using grades. So we have two places. We've got course and transcript. So previously, as I said, this was just comparing some strings. Now, super simple change. It just compares letters instead. The letter value on the grade object. And then the same thing in the transcript. Now this works because inside of grade, we were assigning a letter value. super simple change. What we did is, going back to one of those important quotes, we made change easy so that we can then make the easy change. If we hadn't have done this extracting the object, we would have to add some kind of extra behavior around here to say like, okay, are you a string? Are you a number? What are we doing over here? But now we can just refer to it and say the letter. And that hopefully should pass the tests, or have I got another set of tests ahead? Just double checking. Okay, I potentially may have just mixed up my commit order. So I'm just going to fast forward. So now we've fulfilled that requirement. I know the tests are failing, bear with me. This one, courses now have a student year requirement. Now, if you recall, we had a little discussion about duplicating this requirements behavior across the courses and the transcript, and it was fine. We didn't have to make any changes to it. Now we're having to make changes. And now that code smell is starting to become more of a problem. So this is a named code smell when you have to make the same or similar changes to multiple locations when you implement new functionality or you do some changes. This is called shotgun surgery, which is probably my favorite named one because it's just fun to say. So we would have to change the functionality here for the validation and also here. Now, one way we can solve the shotgun surgery issue is to do the refactoring extract class. Now, this is something important I want you all to take away from this talk, is that code smells have a name and they also have one or more corresponding refactorings. And this talk isn't necessarily to teach you them all, and I don't expect you to remember them all, but just know that that information is out there. Like, people have already worked these out. So I'm going to, what we need to do is extract some sort of object that will handle the validation for us. We can put this similar logic from both locations into one other object and it will do it for us, okay? We're going to accomplish that in a course requirement object. So if we just export a default class of course requirement as a constructor, and I think we want to end up with code that looks like this. We just want some sort of validator.validate student, something along those lines. And we can put all of the functionality inside of this function, okay? We're going to come back to this file. So I think we want a function that accepts a student and will perform the validations on there. I cut and paste this as just an example. We'll come back to that. Now, what are the things we're validating? If we check the course, at the moment, we're doing a required course, a required grade, and we know we've been asked to add a required year as well for students. If you think about this specific problem, I think it would actually make more sense to put the year before the other requirements, because I imagine that it's more important that a student has to be in year 8, and then the others are theoretically optional. So I feel like this makes more sense in that order. So we can just easily amend those. Now, previously, we would have to update the logic here, but we know we're going to be replacing that, okay? So now that I've worked out what I want, I'm going to migrate these to the course requirement constructor. I'm just going to cut and paste, remove them from here, and they're going to go in here instead. One term you may hear a lot when we're talking about refactoring is red-green refactor, which I am very much breaking at the moment whilst I'm in this talk, which is admittedly bad practice, but it states that ideally you would have tests, and when you refactor, you would make a change, it would be red. Wait, I've approached this the wrong way around, but you need to add new functionality, you make it red, you update your tests functionality so that your tests become green, and then you could refactor. Obviously, there's been a lot of red on the left-hand side here so far. So we're putting our requirements in here, and then inside our validate function is where we need to start thinking about the validation itself. So for a start, if there's no students applied, I think we would fail the validation. That's easy enough. And then we need to think about the new feature of the required year. Where's that gone? Okay. We'll come to this broken part next, but if there is a required year, then we can say if the student dot year group, I believe we called it. We've not even provided the year to the student yet. That's a mistake. So easy as that. Year group. Okay. Going back to here, so if the year group is not equals to this dot required year, then we'll return false for there. So that has probably fulfilled our new feature request. And then we've got the logic down here, which I would have to edit quite a bit. And I'm not going to bore you with at this moment. But instead, just like Art Attack, here's one I made earlier. Oh no, it's Blue Peter, isn't it? So it's the same logic. If we've not got a student, return false. Do we have a year group requirement? If so, does the student match the year group or not? And then is there a course requirement? And then I'm wrapping the following logic inside of there because it doesn't make sense that you would require a certain grade without the corresponding course. So we'd say, has the student taken this previous course? If not, we'll return false. Did they get their required grade? If not, return false. And at the end of that, if they've passed everything, we'll return true, which should pass the tests, though, as you have seen, I have been kind of ignoring all of the broken tests on the left-hand side for a little while now. If we implement this new validate function elsewhere, we can say if we need to call this elsewhere, don't we? So we've replaced our increasingly complex logic for the validation. We want to replace that by saying, does this course have requirements? Okay, well, I've gone a little bit off-piste here. I'm going to fast forward us to the safe space so that I can actually explain what we did. Courses now accept a requirements object, okay, which is one of these course requirements. Altogether, we migrated the logic for requirements into there. We pass in the year group, or a previous course requirement, an attained grade requirement, and then we can create a course requirement object and provide that to courses. And then whenever we need to check if a student is allowed to take this, we can just ask that requirements object. So we can say if this.requirements exists and the student fails the validation, then we'll return false. They're not allowed to enroll on this course. With corresponding logic in the transcript, it looks slightly different just because of the scope here, but does the course have requirements? If so, does the student fail those requirements? We'll continue instead of returning because we're inside of a loop here. And we're back to green because I fast forwarded. I must have missed a step during the talk. I know we just covered quite a lot of ground there. Does anyone have any questions before the last little part of the live coding? No? Okay. So we encountered the shotgun surgery code smell where we had to update very similar code in multiple places to facilitate the new feature. We solved that by extracting a class that encapsulates the requirements, and then we can just ask that, do you validate? And we have all of our logic inside this validate function. And it's easier to change in future. If we get new validation requirements, we can just add them to here. There's one place to change. We're now also fulfilling the single responsibility principle. We have one place that fulfills that logic, one reason to change. So if we just check back to our requirements, grades have a score. We implemented that earlier. And courses now have a student year requirement. We implemented that. Students now have a year group, and courses have a set of requirements that are validated by the course requirement object. Now, that's the last of the actual requirements from our users, but I would like to point out, if we have a look at transcript and course, these are the two places that we are testing validation. And this is something that I think comes up a lot in JavaScript. Both of these places, you'll notice, we're first checking, do the requirements even exist? And then if they do, we're going to call validation on them. There are a few ways to solve this. This, at the moment, it's only in two places. This feels like, is it worth it? But I wanted to demonstrate the upcoming change because I think it's a problem that occurs all the time in JavaScript. And I feel like we're so used to just put a null check at the beginning. That's fine, just put a null check and the problem goes away. But as our program grows in size and complexity, all of those null checks begin to weigh us down. So we are going to implement the null object pattern, which you may have heard of. It is quite popular in game development, for example, because I would like to instead remove this null check from both places and just check, does the student pass the validation? I don't want to worry if it's null. Our tests are going to fail now, right? So how do we do this? If we go to our requirements, we need a way of creating a null object. At the moment, we're exporting a default from here. I'm instead just going to export a class null requirement. I should also spell that correctly. That would help. It's going to have a constructor. It's not actually going to do anything. And it's going to have a validate function, which still accepts a student. And it returns true. This is going to complain at the moment because there's more than one class in this file. I'm just going to disable a few of these prettier issues to get rid of all of that noise. Okay. Now we can use this null requirement validator, null requirement class in place of the course requirement class, because it's still fulfilling the same interface. It has a validate function that accepts a student. Because JavaScript is duck typed, we know that when we call something, it will check, do you have the validate function? Okay, I'm going to call you now. So when course accepts the requirements, we can say that if there are no requirements provided, we will instead say this dot requirements, this dot requirements equals new null requirement. Else, oh, that's the wrong key. Sorry to jump you all over visually there. Else assign the requirements we were provided with. Does anyone not understand why that works? Okay, I'll take that as a good sign. We've replaced in the situation where we're not given any requirements, we've instead assigned a null requirement object, which implements the same interface. It just returns some default data, in this case true. So that down here, we no longer have to check, do the requirements exist? And if so, call validate on them, because we've provided a null implementation that does have the validate function. It just happens to return true. And the tests still pass. And so ends the live programming portion of the talk. If we pop back to the slides, does anyone have any questions about the things that we covered today? Don't be shy. Any question is a good question.
If we go into there's questions in the chat.
Oh, is there? Ah.
Not
okay.
unusual for Suffolk developers. So I'm going to work from the bottom upwards. So MT to everyone. What if requirements will be a random object? Question mark. Might be better to go in the other direction. Does that make sense?
Okay. If we put this here, what if the requirements are a random object? Yeah, that is definitely a valid issue here. Because we're in JavaScript, not TypeScript, we can make far fewer guarantees about the types of our objects. And if this was some like production application, I would be doing some more rigorous checking of that issue. This was somewhat simplified to demonstrate and explain the null object pattern.
I think that's all of the questions, Matt. Anyone else? Paul, it's not like you to be so quiet.
To be honest, the questions, it was very good. It's difficult to find anything to ask.
There was admittedly some issues with the tests where I was slightly not quite on the rails, which meant the tests failed. Obviously, if this was a normal workday, I would have slightly less time requirements and would be in a better position to fix the tests as I went. But as I explained earlier, I have a series of Git commits to use as checkpoints along the way.
I think you should take the lack of questions and the fact that Paul Grenier has sat and behaved himself as a massive compliment. So don't start analysing it. Feel good. Sadly, I didn't answer your question because I'm not a developer. So my answer to how many years have I coded is 0.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm just looking through my own notes to make sure that I have hit every point that I wanted to. And
I have a question, guys.
Yes.
Well, normally I don't code this way. I don't use classes. I come from JavaScript, not from other languages. So for me, the class is a new thing that I never used. Mm-hmm. Although, yeah, it's nice and I should actually get into it, but I don't code this way. I do use TypeScript and stuff. But anyway, the thing that I don't understand very well is the null requirement thing. That I really didn't get it, because I didn't see the way you were checking for null was fine. I mean, I didn't see the need.
It is fine, yeah.
All of these.
Absolutely. It was fine. It was only, like I said, it was only in 2 places.
Well, first of all, I don't understand the advantage of it. And then I don't understand how you actually did it. I don't understand how that class validates anything. You're not passing any parameters to it.
That's the point. So if we go back to the way that it was before, we were having to check, do the requirements, are there any requirements? And if so, I want to call the validate function on it. So this is where we were before. It is admittedly quite a small example because we're only doing it in 2 places in this small application, but this is something that's so prevalent in JavaScript, having to null check the things that you want to use beforehand. And I know that there's some new syntax, so you can use the not null
Chaining
coalescing,
operator.
null the chaining operator. Like, I know there is some new options for that now, but null checking is something that we just do all the time in JavaScript, and you don't always have to. And I think that a lot of the time it is an annoyance that we just accept. It's something that we accept because we're just used to doing it. It's like the squeaky door in your house. Every time you open it, you go, oh, I don't like that squeak, but it's fine. It still closes, it still opens. That's fine. And this null check is fine until you're in a large application where you're doing that same null check in 100 places. And then suddenly it starts to look a lot more attractive to implement something like the null object pattern. Because, as I said, it has the same external interface as the regular course requirement. It has a validate function that accepts a student, even though we're not using it, and it will just return true.
That's the part I don't understand. If you're not using it, what's that doing then?
We're using the null requirement class inside of the constructor of the course.
No, I mean the validate function inside the class. That's the method.
Oh, I see what you mean. It does get used, and we're returning true because I think that's, if you have provided no requirements, I would expect you to say that you pass the requirements, because there aren't any. You can't fail the requirements if there aren't any.
Okay, I see a class that has a method called validate.
Yeah.
And a parameter argument that says a student. Where is student coming from? That's the part I don't get.
This is just so that it matches the function in the regular implementation.
That's another class altogether.
It is another class, but it looks the same to your JavaScript engine. Both of them have a validate function. So because JavaScript is duck typed, if I was to have, if we just write some dummy code here, duck typed object.
Alfred, what language are you coming from?
JavaScript.
You're just using JavaScript but without classes?
I never use class, no, ever.
Yeah. I also, it depends on the environment I'm in. Like if I'm in a React environment, I don't use classes in React, for example.
React. I use functional programming all the time.
Me too. In that environment, I use a more functional style. In this environment, where the ideas are kind of cross-transferable, like this doesn't have to be in a Node Express backend. This doesn't have to be in a React or an Angular front end. This is more the theoretical side of it that can be translated to basically any arena.
Yeah, I mean, I use Node for backend a lot, and sometimes I'm just doing Node and there's no React at all involved. But you know, I do my classes, if you like, as in my modules, do their things and return their things on their side. But they're not classes as such. They just do the thing, and you know, the modules, they return things, but they are not classes. And I guess that's what I'm throwing out because of the class syntax, and I just didn't understand how that validate function gets that student on and all that.
Maybe it helps you to see here that I've created a regular course requirement object and a null requirement object we can use either, because both of them have a validate function. So this one, the real one, has a validate function that accepts a student, as does this one, has a validate function that expects to receive a student. So we can use those in the place of each other. This probably won't make sense to you if you're not used to classes, but if we go,
I mean, talk about objects, all fine, but is the
going
classes
back
thing
to
that-
where I said this is not a talk about solid. The L stands for the Liskov substitution principle, which means that anything that looks the same, you can basically use interchangeably. Both of them have a validate function, so you can use them interchangeably in that example. Potentially, this is something that I have a series of, at the end, I've got some references that might be valuable to you. Unfortunately, I can't explain all of the kind of ideas behind a class-based approach at the end of a talk. And classes aren't always the right solution. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. A lot of the time when you're refactoring, though, the language and the history of refactoring does tend to come from a class environment, using things like object-oriented programming.
Well, so it comes from a strongly typed environment, and a lot of it came before there was sort of sensible JavaScript. So yeah, a lot of it is geared that way, but it's just as applicable in this environment as well.
But it seems that classes was put in there for the people that came from those languages.
That's a very astute observation, I think. So I think it was certainly to begin with.
Pretty recent.
Yeah, like I definitely have a bias in that regard. Like a lot of my history, I've traveled through like object-oriented environments, and it's only since working with front-end JavaScript libraries that I've started to move towards a more functional style, especially for those. It's just that the topic of the talk, refactoring, does tend to come from like a strongly typed history, and classes tend to be the lingua franca when you're talking about refactoring. So I did this with classes.
So I would argue that was beside the point. I think it's just classes were the tools they had and they were using at the time. The concepts of refactoring and making sure you can make the changes safely go across languages. But I think classes is an excellent way of demonstrating it still.
Okay. Maybe you would find some value from the sort of references that I've provided. I think the refactoring.com is from Martin Fowler, who kind of wrote the canonical book about refactoring. And then this refactoring.guru website is kind of a fun and kind of accessible packaging of that content. Ryan McDermott on GitHub has a few repositories with basically just a long README file explaining some good practices. So I've included the clean code JavaScript one here. This is a talk from Sandy Metz, who I believe I mentioned earlier. She's a very kind of popular and established Ruby developer who gives some very good talks. Despite having never written a line of Ruby in my life, I gain a lot of value from things that the Ruby community puts out. They do have a much higher emphasis on like test-driven development and some of this theory that I've been talking about tonight. And then this website at the end, it looks awful. Like this is some old school website stuff. And I stumbled upon this, and it is like a wiki about so many like programming theoretical concepts, and you can just kind of get lost in here. And so have a poke around there, anyone that's interested in it. Any other questions?
No, right. We're 7:05, guys. That's just over an hour. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm surprised I made it through alive.
You did. Of course, you made it through life. You did fine. I was going to say, does anybody have any other events to mention? And we do have a live Ruby streamer on the call who might want to mention an upcoming event.
I'm assuming that's me.
It is you. Do you want to talk about? Is it Sunday?
For anyone who's interested in Ruby, and who isn't, let's face it, there's a YouTube channel called Sunday Club, which is Sunday SUNDAE, and it is live streamed every Sunday morning, 10:30 a.m. And there is a year's worth of previous live streams you can watch about Ruby and Rails. Nothing specifically on refactoring though, so
thank you, Stephen.
Haven't got anything on that.
And if anyone has any other stuff, Max, send us details and we'll share that through the ISTN. If anyone's got any other live streaming and code pairing that they record, make sure, we're happy to share any of that type of content. Matt, we can't thank you enough. I've been getting positive reviews in the background, so thank you ever so much. It's been lovely listening to our young community speaking.
I'm going to put a link in the chat both to some of the documents that I had to kind of keep me on the right path. One of them is much more structured than the other, but both of them just have some ideas in them. Maybe people find them useful.
Can you do me a favor and email me that list as well? And what I'll do is
that's probably a better idea.
When I put your talk live, what I'll do is pop it into the notes alongside it as well. So people can catch on, and we normally send those out back through the group, so you get access to it there. So thank you so much for attending. As I mentioned, if you want to sign up to the istn.org.uk for all of the events that we run, and we have just had another request for another meetup, so we're very keen to get as many meetups happening under this one banner. So one email should fill your whole month, populate your whole month with lots of different events and interesting things to listen to. Thank you so much for attending. We couldn't do this without your support, and we will see you at the next event. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks, I really appreciate you spending your evening with me.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.